When the SAR call comes over your cell phone or your pager, your entire being is flooded with chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol. This prepares us for the task at hand. If the task was unusual or traumatic, our stress response systems can go into overdrive. Our stress reactions to critical incidents are common reactions to traumatic experiences. These reactions can affect your emotional and physical health, impair your cognitive ability, and upset your normal routines.
With the physical domain, you can expect that with a search and rescue call-out, your body physically is going to get energized for that task. You've been energized for however long. Sometimes SAR tasks can go multiple days. And so after that task, it makes sense that you would be fatigued, feeling lethargy, right? Your muscles have been energized for an extended period of time, even if you're not aware of it. And afterwards, it makes sense that you would be tired. Oftentimes, search and rescue members talk about feeling nausea or stomach upset, that sort of thing. When your body gets energized by those chemicals to physically prepare you for a search and rescue call, your digestive system gets shut down. It's not needed during the physical exertion of a search and rescue task. However, afterwards, you're going to want to have that back online, and that system is a little slow to come online. So it makes sense that you would feel nausea and stomach upset.
Hyperactivity and restlessness can also occur as your body tries to dissipate and flush the stress hormones. This can look like pacing, fidgeting, inability to stay still, and being restless. Hyperventilation can occur as a result of the body exerting itself during the incident. You may also experience things like muscle spasms or tremors as your body tries to release excess energy.
Another common physical symptom that search and rescue members describe after a stressful SAR call are headaches. So for starters, it's very common to be dehydrated during the task. It's hard to keep enough liquid flowing into you, and so those headaches might come from dehydration after the task. Also, those stress chemicals that you activated, they dilate the blood vessels, and so that dilation and expansion can also lead to headaches after the fact. So those are very commonly expressed by search and rescue members. Generally, they go away in a few days at the most.
The mental or cognitive domain is our brain's processing center. Our brains like to have information organized and filed in an orderly fashion so that we can use it to our advantage in the future.
So it's important to recognize that a search and rescue task asks a lot of your mental acuity. You're really focused intensely for an extended period of time to try to gather all the input and information, hopefully to resolve that search in an effective way. Your brain is really activated mentally, and so it can take some time for it to come back down after that energizing and exhilaration. It also can take a little more time if you've got a really unusual call, something that you haven't done, something that has a strong emotional component to it, like a death, or if it's a search that's been suspended and unresolved.
When a critical incident occurs, this can sometimes result in things like preoccupation with the task, where our brain is trying to make sense of the call. This can be particularly difficult when the task is unresolved. Flashbacks or intrusive memories can also occur as your brain tries to make sense of a difficult situation. This often occurs when it's your first experience with that situation. Remember that our brains are primed for survival. We're supposed to remember things that could be potentially dangerous to us so that we can use it in the future.
Sensory distortion is sometimes described by search and rescue members. An example of that would be, say, a phantom smell or a phantom sound or a phantom texture where you feel something. It can also include elements like time being distorted, where your sense of time doesn't make sense. Was that a long time ago, or all of a sudden this sort of thing happened? The sensory distortion can sometimes come with a body recovery where you have, say, the smell, something triggering like that. They can also come where you have a very strong emotional component to the search and rescue call, especially if you're dealing with the family of the subject. So these sensory distortions are really an attempt at our brain to make sense of things using our 5 different senses and try to process it at the end of the day.
Problems with concentration can occur. When your stress response system is activated, we don't necessarily need to think, we just need to do. And so following a critical incident, what can commonly occur is problems with concentration, maybe having foggy thinking or difficulty making decisions.
Another thing to remember is that when you're out on a search and rescue call, your brain is energized to really take in as much input from the environment as possible. So for example, if a search and rescue member is searching or putting their skills to use as a tracker, you can imagine looking very intently at the ground will really fatigue your mind because it's taking in so much more visual cues than it's used to. You can actually get a sense of burnout from using that mental muscle for an extended period of time. So it's understandable that after a SAR task, especially one that has gone on for a long period of time, that physically our mind would be fatigued, have an inability to concentrate, or might have foggy thinking. Search and rescue calls are emergencies, and you can imagine emergency will have an emotional component to it. But as a search and rescue member, we have to park our emotions so that we can go and function and get the job done. We have to function over feelings. But after that SAR task is complete, it is really important that we take a look at those emotions that might have been felt during the SAR task and take an opportunity to process them and let them be expressed.
Following a critical incident, changes in this area may include things like irritability or anger, particularly when you are struggling with a task or an outcome of the call.
Another very common emotion that's expressed by search and rescue members after a difficult or tough SAR call is either sadness or grief. And that's very understandable, especially when you have a body recovery or a SAR task, for example, where you have a child go missing. In search and rescue base, sometimes we're exposed to the family, and in their moment of emergency, they can be going through some really intense emotions. It can also happen when we might know the subject that we're searching for. Having those relationships and connections oftentimes enhances the emotional element to a search and rescue call. And then another type of SAR call that oftentimes generates sadness or grief, even if it can have a positive outcome where you find the subject alive, can involve children. Children have a special place in everybody's heart. So even if you find the child and they're alive, our brain oftentimes goes to the what-abouts or what-ifs.
Fear or phobia can occur, particularly if there was a perceived threat to self or team. This can look like things like avoiding places or certain activities as a result of the things that you have experienced.
The fear can also show up if it's recognized that you do some of the same activities as the subject. For example, if you're out on an avalanche call for a backcountry skier and backcountry skiing is something that you enjoy doing, the outcome of that SAR call can start to weigh on your mind in terms of your future activities out in the backcountry. Another time search and rescue members describe having fears or phobias show up is when you've gone out on a search for a child and you're a parent yourself. It makes sense that our mind would go there and connect especially to that child and to the parent in distress when we're out searching, and then afterwards look for the opportunities for our own family members to stay safe.
Anxiety and stress are not unusual to experience following a critical incident. This can look like being on edge, or again, being a little bit more irritable.
That anxiety can also show itself when you have something that you very strongly believe in being threatened or shown to not necessarily be true in this SAR call. An example of that might be where good efforts produce results. So if a search and rescue tries hard, we should be able to find the subject. Sadly, we know in some very rare instances, the subject is not found and the search is suspended. In those moments, that can really challenge our belief system and produce things like anxiety. Another one, sometimes described by search and rescue members, might be feeling really low or having a low mood or having a sense of guilt over the search. That can come sometimes when the outcome is not what we want, especially if it's a body recovery. That low mood or feeling of guilt can come when the SAR member feels like they might have missed something on the search, or feel like they have some sort of responsibility for the negative outcome on a SAR task.
The spiritual and worldview domain focus on how we view the world and make sense of it. This domain can be significantly impacted following a critical incident, particularly if the task goes against strongly held worldviews. Incidents involving children, for example, are particularly challenging for many members and shake our understanding of the way that things are supposed to happen.
An example of one of these deeply held beliefs is good things happen to good people. We perceive ourselves to be a good person, and therefore good things should happen to us. When we extend that to the subject, believing they're a good person, and yet the outcome of the search and rescue call was not good, that can really touch on that belief system. Some common searches where search and rescue members describe their moral code or their belief system being impacted are, for example, subjects who have died by suicide, searches involving children, even when the subject is found alive and well, a search for someone that we perceive to be part of the vulnerable sector, when the outcome of the SAR call does not make any sense. An example of that might be on an avalanche call where you have a group of skiers down below making conservative choices in terms of their terrain and where they're playing, and someone else goes up above and triggers off an avalanche by doing something high risk, and the group that pays the price are those ones making the conservative, safe choice. It doesn't make sense.
We can have questions like, why did this happen? We can experience anger at God or the universe. We can have feelings of injustice.
So a search and rescue member who has spiritual practices, they may withdraw from that community, or they may stop those faith-based practices altogether. After a tough SAR call, those stress chemicals that were produced in order to energize us for the task can also affect our behaviors in the days after. An example of that would be where a search and rescue member might be a little more impulsive with some of the things they do. Remember, while you're on a SAR task, you're energized and focused on a very specific task, and after that pressure is taken off, we can sometimes just kind of let loose. Search and rescue members sometimes describe either overeating after a stressful SAR call or undereating. Remember, our digestive system during those stressful calls is shut down. It's not a system that the body needs to put a lot of energy and effort into, but while the SAR task is going on, you're using up a ton of energy, and so your body might be in a calorie deficit after that tough SAR call and either want to eat a lot, or it might still have your digestive system shut down and be a little slow to come on, so you might be undereating.
You may also notice changes in sex drive. Remember, when your stress response system is activated, those functions not needed to address that danger are slowed down. You may experience withdrawal. Sometimes we need a little bit of space to regroup. The important part is to make sure that we're not retreating for too long. Hypervigilance can occur. When our stress response system is activated, we are on high alert or hyper alert. We can remain in this state for a few days afterwards.
A very common symptom that search and rescue members describe having after a really tough SAR call is having their sleep disturbed. Remember as well that our brain is completely energized during a SAR task, and it's our brain that really needs and prioritizes sleep. So shutting down and slowing down your brain after a tough SAR call can take a bit of time. It's important to recognize that during sleep, the filing of the experiences that we have happen during our REM sleep. So it is really important to try to prioritize your sleep, get into a good sleep pattern, and make sure in the days after a tough SAR call that you are getting good rest.
Crying spells can occur. Remember, we park our emotions when we're on task, but they're still there. And following a difficult time, we can experience a raw release of emotion, which can be your body's way of flushing out the stress hormones. Zoning out, or as some people call it, the 1,000-yard stare, can be pretty common following a critical incident. Sometimes we just need that bit of time to check out, or maybe it's that we're preoccupied with something related to the call. While we looked at these domains separately, What's important to understand is that they are all interrelated and impact each other.
An example of that is where we talked about fatigue. Fatigue can affect us physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. The important thing to remember for both you as a SAR member and for your support network around you is to recognize if there's been any change.
Most SAR members find things improve after about a week, and then they return to normal between 2 and 4 weeks post-task. It is vital to remember that critical incident stress is a common normal reaction to the calls that we face as search and rescue members. You, as a search and rescue volunteer, are BC Search and Rescue's most valuable asset. Taking care of yourself is vitally important. If you're struggling at any time, you or your family members can call 1-800-663-3456. Take care of yourselves.